or protecting their students. After I heard about it, I immediately texted Chief and Lieutenant Dan, Nancy, and Lisa as the pro tem, and said, Chief, please reach out to your contacts in Uvalde to see what they need. And in my text, I said, we will move heaven and earth to accommodate anything that they need. And we are reaching out to them as we speak. There's such a media presence that Nancy and I were just talking about. We will figure out a way as a community to provide assistance in any capacity that we can. I will later today reach out to Mayor Don McLaughlin and offer our condolences and our assistance with whatever the city needs. We will talk about it tonight at the Northeast Partnership Mayor's Dinner that we have on the last Wednesday of every month to see what we can do as a partnership to provide assistance and grieve with them. And if we don't think it can happen at home, it can. Just this year, Lisa and I were talking this morning, just this year alone at Davenport High School, our students and our children were under lockdown 3 times for either the threat of a gun on campus or a gun on campus. 3 times. So it can happen here. And we started our emergency planning and crisis management and crisis communication plans a year ago this month, and we are completing those as we speak. And we will have in the not too distant future, probably in July, we'll have a tabletop exercise that we'll go through with department heads, the chief and Dan, as well as us, and we'll talk about an active shooter possibility. So with that, let's take a few moments of silence, please. Amen. Thank you. All right, on to item number 3, citizen comment period. I didn't see anybody that had signed up. Thanks, Marissa. We'll go on straight into, while we're here, business items. The following items are for discussion, consideration, and action. 4A is the draft zoning ordinance. So what we are here to do today is to help bring across the goal line a project that we have been working on for years, right? So, and this is what we're going to discuss today is the product of a lot of individuals and the Planning and Zoning Commission working very, very hard over the past few years to edit and draft some changes to our planning and zoning ordinance. And I'd like to thank all of those individuals, many of whom are here at this dais and out in the audience, and everybody on planning and zoning for their hard and diligent work these past couple years. This came to us in March and April, and we decided that, hey, we would give council an opportunity to read everything, to think about it, to digest it, and we wanted to make sure it was after the election. So one of the first things that that you're going to get to do is, as place one, is participate in this very important endeavor. So, and it's great to have you on board, Kelly. Thanks for being here. So what we'd like to be able to do, if we could, we'd go through this and make changes and edits as required and as needed, and then proceed on to discuss when we would like to have a public hearing to act on this and hopefully push it across the goal line. So when we'll discuss that once we're done talking today. If for some reason we can't get through everything, we have to get this right. So I don't want you to feel pressure in order to accomplish this. It has to be done today mentality. What it needs to be is it needs to be done right. So if we need to postpone or delay, we can have another one of these meetings as well. So any questions on that? Any comments? This is open discussion. Okay, great. Bryce, it is your show. Talk to us.
Good afternoon, Council. For those of you who don't know me, I'm Bryce Cox. I'm a city planner with DNRBZ, the city's law firm. I'm not an attorney. I just do planning work. They brought me on a little under a year ago to start helping our clients with specific planning and zoning related questions that are kind of outside the field of legal, but very much inside the realm of the need of, hey, what are we supposed to do on this? We may not have specialized people to help with us, things like that. So I came on and started helping out, I want to say, I guess, fall of last year. And so we worked with P&Z through a number of workshops, a number of items to start tweaking the ordinance, revising pieces. This is all based on an ordinance that was drafted originally by Friesen Nichols several years ago, as everyone probably knows. So what I want to start off going through today is just a little bit of kind of some high-level changes, some high-level differences that we've worked through with P&Z and kind of where we stand against the current ordinance and a little bit about the previous drafts versus what you have in front of you today. So with that, one of the first big changes has to do with the zoning dimensional regulations. So this is the area of the code where we establish minimum lot sizes, setbacks, things like that. There's a whole chart for it. Specifically, we looked at decreasing front yard setbacks for the community commercial, light industrial, and heavy industrial zoning districts. They were at 40 feet and 50 feet respectively, and we're looking at proposing to reduce them to 20 feet and 30 feet. A lot of this has to do with how do you want to see that area being used. You know, just pushing buildings back off the road creates a different kind of situation where we now have all of this open space between where the building is and the roadway is. If buildings are too far or you require them too far, you're going to automatically come in with certain styles of development. Typically, it's going to be auto-oriented, where I get parking lots in between the roadway and building fronts. So obviously, as we talk about at least the community commercial section, we want to look at providing some flexibility and options. Most of the time, as we get into the industrial development sections, a lot of that's going to be set back well beyond the minimums anyways. But again, this allows for a little bit of that flexibility. We also looked at decreasing side yard setbacks for light industrial on interior lots. So there was a requirement for 15-yard setbacks. We looked to reduce it to 0, which complies and aligns with building code. So building code actually allows commercial development to be built all the way up to property lines, especially on the side lot lines. There's just extra requirements in building code that come into play when you get closer than 10 feet to the lot line. Like fire-rated walls, things like that, where you can have windows or doors in different pieces. Additionally, we're looking to adjust the minimum lot area to an acreage calculation from square feet, which just resulted in some minor adjustments. So it's just uniform across the board. When we talk about half-acre lots, we want those numbers to actually be half-acre, things like that. Continuing down that same piece, we did remove maximum building coverage. So there is already an impervious cover limit. There's not really a need to say you can only have so much building of that impervious cover. It's kind of one or the other. And I think the community is looking towards impervious cover. And so that's an easier piece to do, which basically says, hey, we've got these impervious cover limits that we'll allow, and that can be building, it can be parking, it can be all of those things that are not, just open landscaped grass space that has full impervious to it. Along with that, we proposed to adjust some of the limits that were originally in there. So for the residential estate, we're looking at keeping it at 35%. The community commercial, we're looking at increasing it from 65 to 75%. The neighborhood mixed use is increased as well to 75% from 65. The community mixed use also up to 75. Light industrial and heavy industrial, again, increasing those. And especially on the light industrial and heavy industrial, because it's probably one of the biggest shifts, that same kind of question comes in, which is if I've got a, let's just say 10-acre site, I can have impervious cover up to 5 acres under 50%. which means the other 5 acres is going to be what, right? If it can't be parking, if it can't be building, et cetera, do we want it as buffer? Do we want it as landscaping? And if we do want those things, then we should target those provisions and say, hey, you've got to do this kind of buffering, you've got to do these kinds of landscaping. And so increasing that impervious cover actually lets you have a little bit more compact sites so that we don't have kind of that wasted space or less used space that can create kind of sprawl development.
Okay, for clarification, excuse me, Bryce, I'll
Absolutely.
interrupt here, but for clarification for council, these increases from 65 to 75, that's from the draft ordinance from last June?
Yes.
These were originally 35%, all of them. What allows them to go to this number was the septic system. I mean, the sewer lines, yeah. But anyway, these numbers are not from the current ordinance 13, they're from the last draft prior to this one.
That's correct. That's correct.
So, just for clarification.
And one thing to always remember about all these things that we're talking about, most of these regulations stack on top of each other. So it's not this or that. It's you have to comply with impervious cover. You also have to comply with building setbacks. You also have to comply with minimum lot size. You also have to comply with any screening and buffering and landscaping requirements, parking requirements, et cetera. And so there's not one that necessarily supersedes the other, but it's really a full package for development. And so it's good to think about things holistically like that because there's a lot of moving pieces that end up having to go into development, especially commercial development.
Hey, Bryce, can we hang on just a second there? Marissa, do we have a copy of the proposed zoning, that picture? Do you know if we have a copy of that so we can show council?
The map?
Yeah, the map. That's what I want, yeah. That's the one. Bryce, one of my questions is, as we drive down FM 3009, so the path that you just took to get into town here, we go through the city of Schertz, and we go through the city of Schertz and their heavy industrial development that exists all the way to the flyover bridge for the railroad tracks into this, at the city of Garden Ridge. So we have done a very good job over 50 years of trying to keep a buffer between us and the industrial sprawl. And we want to be able to continue to do that based on the inputs from our residents and the master plan. Changing these things for light industrial, heavy industrial, are we inviting that industrial sprawl into Garden Ridge?
I don't think so. I would say that the best way to control where you want different types of development is to make sure that your zoning map complies with what the community is looking for, right? And so if we don't want industrial sprawl in certain places, then we need to make sure that we've not zoned it for industrial. Or as we go through that process, doing city-initiated rezoning to involuntarily rezone people's property so that you maintain corridors and things like that. You know, this draft zoning ordinance does introduce some new zoning districts and some overlay pieces that, if adopted, are on the books now, but it doesn't actually change the zoning map.
Okay.
Right, and so we actually have to go through that process if council's interested in broadly applying those things, and some of them are really targeted towards certain corridors or certain areas, especially with the overlays. And so if council is interested in fully enforcing the zoning ordinance, then the recommendation that I would have is at the same time or in short order after adopting a zoning ordinance is going ahead and doing city-initiated rezoning to tweak your zoning map or apply those overlay districts or do those things so that we have development queued up and we have the regulations in place before you get approached by that developer wanting to do something on a piece of property, right? We got to get ahead of it because once they've already come in and started submitting items, it's a little past the ability to say, hey, that's great, but now we want to change our mind. We can't do, you can't really do that at that point very easily. So if we want to, again, insulate ourselves, then it's doing city-initiated rezoning.
Okay. Thank you. Council, any questions about, Kelly, this is one of the first times you've seen this slide, about where the zoning is and what we have planned as far as light industrial, heavy industrial?
Yeah, I've went through it, I've reviewed it. I don't have any questions so far. Everything seems pretty cut and dry to me. But I had about the same question you did as far as the industrial, so that's gonna be a tough one, I think.
Okay. Thanks, Bryce. Thanks for entertaining me. You, please continue.
So, and also, I guess a little bit on this is the impervious cover rates that you have for, or that are being proposed for industrial are still also lower than Schertz. So Schertz is at 80%, I believe, last time I looked, for their industrial. And they back in that also with a mandatory 20% landscaping requirement as well. The next piece that's a big shift, and I'm sure we'll talk a lot about this part, is storage and use of vehicles and equipment in residential zoning districts. So there's a lot of conversation at the last couple P&Z meetings before they made their recommendation on this item, and I believe that the recommendation, they shifted a little bit of the language in this, so the slide is not completely up to date to where we are currently at in the proposal. So in the original section 20607, RV trailers, boats, commercial farm vehicles, it required them to be concealed from view in a garage or parked behind the front of a building line. And again, it has an exclusion about what it considers the commercial and farm vehicles and excludes 1 ton or smaller trucks. It also requires RV trailers, boats, commercial farm vehicles to be parked in the rear or interior side yard, that they're generally screened from public view of the right-of-way by being placed behind the structure or behind a 6-foot tall solid fence. No parking on unpaved areas. Also, you can't use the vehicles, RVs or trailers, as a temporary or permanent residence, right? So it's just storage. Can't have your RV out to have folks staying in it while it's parked at your house. Additionally, cannot park trailers, RV, boats, again, farm vehicles, et cetera, in front of the home for more than 10 consecutive days, not more than 4 times a year. It's pretty common provision for communities that regulate these kinds of storage items, because it's kind of that loading, unloading period as people go on vacations, especially if they're storing them off-site. At like a storage facility or something like that, is bringing it home, cleaning it up, getting it ready for that big road trip or whatever they're doing. And there are some limitations that the city has on that. And then again, can't park trailers, RV, boats, or et cetera in the right-of-way. Questions on that, or do we want to wait and have that as a full conversation? I know there's been a bunch of comments that had come in on that.
Sorry, let's keep going.
Perfect.
And then
Circle back to the
obviously
comments.
circle back
Excellent.
to that.
The next big revision that we did is we revised a lot of the commercial building architecture and articulation requirements. So one of the big changes that's happened in state legislature in recent times is the state legislature passed a law that says that communities can't regulate indirectly, can't prohibit or regulate directly or indirectly building materials for commercial and residential buildings. And we have to allow anything that's allowed in the last 3 editions of a national model code. So for example, the city, I believe, uses the International Building Code, the IBC, as their commercial piece, and the IRC, which is the International Residential Code. Those are published by the International Code Council, and they are national model codes. And so anything that's a permitted building material that's allowed in those things, which is a lot, has to be allowed by state law. So we've peeled back a bunch of those material pieces and those requirements. We also looked at the building articulation. I've had a lot of experience in my career with drafting architectural codes, and I can tell you that no matter what standards the city ends up adopting, whether they're incredibly strict or not strict at all, people who want to build ugly buildings unfortunately build ugly buildings. You can have full masonry ordinances back when we could do that, and you'll still get an ugly building. And a lot of that has to do with the fact that at the end of the day, unfortunately, aesthetics are very much a beauty is in the eye of the beholder. And so what one person thinks is nice and pretty, another may not. I have found that the effort is best spent not trying to tweak the code and get it perfectly so you try to get uniform development, but instead have staff spend that effort talking with folks who maybe are trying to be a little cheaper about their development to say, hey, let's look at ways that we can reduce costs of your development. You know, did you think about reorienting things like this to reduce your paving costs? We can put that money back into the building, right? Most of the people also who are going to develop out of your community may start with a little more or less popular look, but they're going to continue to invest in that property, which is a really great thing about local business because they're part of the community. They have a vested interest in seeing things go well. Out-of-town development, not always the case, especially fast food chains. They're notorious for building a building, it's got a 20-year lifespan, and they walk away from it and build another one down the street. Right, and that's why you see the various fast food restaurants that are not fast food restaurants anymore, but are now other things, car dealerships, et cetera, name your favorite repurposed fast food restaurant. And that's how that happens. You get a lot less of that normally happens with local business just because of the cost to develop, right? And that's the other thing you have to understand is it is very expensive to develop, especially in today's world right now with labor and material costs, but even more so on commercial because the commercial standards for buildings are much higher than residential. So we did revise a lot of that design we revised a lot of the standards to allow for flexibility and options. The goal of it is to maintain the spirit of the requirement to provide visual interest and break up the rhythm of long walls in buildings. We have some allowances that can happen via a lot of different options, right? So we can, the specific requirement is walls which are greater than 45 linear feet long have to be the rhythm of that wall has to be broken up. So visually, we're not making big shoe boxes, but instead we're at least prettying them up a little bit or breaking that rhythm through changes in material, changes in the roof line, physical articulation of that building where we do punch outs or pull ins, changing colors, as well as the use of architectural features like arcades or porticos, dormer windows, parapets, things like that. And a lot of what this flexibility is going to do is it's going to let the architects and folks building these buildings have more architectural flexibility to kind of make unique buildings. And the great thing about unique buildings is that's what really helps champion the feel of your community, right? So I know that Garden Ridge hasn't been blessed with the historic bones that a lot of communities get with their downtowns or their main streets or things like that. But, you know, take your favorite community that's got that. Part of the reason people like those things and they'll originally kind of say, oh, well, it's the old buildings and whatnot, but it's a mishmash. And we've got buildings in those communities from 1900s through present day, all next to each other at different levels. Sometimes second-story architecture that got built after the fact is different than first-story architecture. And it really is that kind of lack of uniformity that helps create that sense of place. So I am a big proponent and recommend always allowing kind of maximum flexibility. Unfortunately, the thing that most communities are afraid of, which is, hey, that metal building that can just come in now, we just can't regulate against. And so again, the idea is, hey, if somebody's looking to do that, how do we talk with them to dress it up, or using your zoning standards because certain buildings lend themselves to certain uses better, right? Obviously, big metal buildings go better in industrial or quasi-industrial heavy commercial uses more than they do restaurants and retail. And so we kind of let a little bit of that mark and a little bit of that piece dictate some of that building form. The next big piece that we did is we added some clarity and updated the requirements for common lot and cross access between commercial lots. So this is driveways that connect parking lots so that you don't have to get back onto 3009 or major arterials and deal with the extra traffic just because I started out at one spot and I need to go 2 businesses over back the other way. Now I've got to take a left turn back onto 3009. I hope that it's not a humongous rush hour time, otherwise we're just going to be queued up. And so this really helps kind of merge some of those pieces. It's also fantastic for fire and emergency services. So we did update those requirements, and it does require the use of either shared driveways or recorded cross-lot access between non-residential or mixed-use developments fronting on streets. And then we also have an exception that allows the city administrator to grant exceptions to cross-access due to site constraints, like you're the end of the road, next to you is the creek, or some kind of geographic feature that is very expensive to cross because somebody has to build a bridge across it or something like that. It just doesn't make sense to do that economically, or it's not very feasible. We've granted the ability for the city administrator to waive in those situations. The next one was to the natural feature overlay district. So there were some changes on this to kind of champion it a little bit more for some of the intent of this. I believe my recollection on this is that a lot of this area is designed for the 3009 corridor so that we can maintain some of that nice wooded frontage. And you don't get, as you were mentioning earlier, the 3009 look in Schertz where it's, landscaping and then building, and we just have everything kind of crushed up together. As far as setbacks and extra enhanced features go, if there's specific corridors that we want to target and things like that, this is one way to do it as opposed to attaching it to a broad zoning district. So the first thing that we did is we reduced the tree preservation requirement. It was originally at 100%. Unfortunately, in development, and I am a humongous tree lover and tree hugger, unfortunately in development of anything, oftentimes incredibly heavily wooded sites, you've got to remove some amount of trees. And that's just the way that it works. You can have 5-acre home sites and they're still removing trees because you've got to get a driveway in, and if you've got a solid row of trees, some of that stuff's got to come out. So 80% is still a very, very, very high level, but it allows for some flexibility and for developers to really pick and choose which trees need to come out and be really thoughtful about it, which is what we want at the end of the day, right? We don't want indiscriminate clearing. We want people to recognize the natural features there. We want them to recognize the natural topography and design their site to fit the geography, as opposed to the other way around of changing the geography to fit their pre-designed site. We also added an allowance for some alternative street screening along the frontage buffer. So the alternatives, the alternative does not reduce. So the allowance is a discretionary piece that would go to, I believe, Planning and Zoning Commission is how we have it written. And we've given them some criteria so that they're not arbitrary and capricious in their decision-making, but instead can uniformly apply these alternative design concepts to things. And you'll see this a couple different places in our code that we've put together. I like to use alternative design compliance as what I like to call the common sense valve, right? Where the request doesn't quite meet the hardship of a true zoning variance, but the idea that they have is great. And, staff looks at it, says this is fantastic, the community's all about it, the developer's all about it, but our code is the only thing getting in the way because we have hard standards. And so this is that valve to say, hey, are you gonna do something that's even better than what we would have gotten under the regular ordinance, but has a little bit of give and take? And this gives you that ability. And we're gonna plan on using these standards to judge each request, right? So that the alternative being requested does not reduce a standard unless it is to the greatest extent practical, equally mitigated or improved by increasing standards or other requirements. So if there's tree planting requirements or other pieces, there's a little bit of allowance for some give and take. So if I want to reduce one section, I may increase the requirements of a different section, and this gives you that ability. The alternative preserves and enhances the quality of the existing landscaping to the greatest extent reasonably possible. So are you maximizing what you're preserving and really championing, picking those great quality trees? Unfortunately on paper, as we look at trees, size is one thing, but not every tree is made the same. So I've seen in my life where people have met minimum preservation requirements, but the trees they chose to preserve ended up being the Charlie Brown elm. Yeah, it's 12 inches, but it's sad looking 12 inches. And so this really gives the city a little bit more discretion in looking at those things. Also, the alternative is in agreement with and promotes the recommendations and policies within the comprehensive plan. Again, we're tying everything back to that comprehensive plan, which is the community's vision, right? It's the big guiding policy document, but it's not hard-coded regulation. The alternative enhances the site and the overall built environment in the city, and that the alternative meets the overall spirit and intent of that natural features overlay district. A little bit about the adjustments that we made on site design elements. So there is a requirement in this natural feature overlay district to provide a certain number of elements, and we give them kind of a menu of list to pick. And that's going to help unify some of the elements that get built in this district so that we have some similar traits as we go between properties, but it's not identical, right? And that's that happy medium of having certain traits that get broadcast between properties without duplicating everything, where it's form built and the person next door comes in and says, well, your code's too difficult to do, so I'm just going to build what they built next door. And then we get basically the ticky-tack version of commercial that you would see in smaller residential production home builders that luckily lack of sewer has helped kind of keep out of the city for the most part. But those things that we always give those critiques of not knowing where you're at because all the homes look the same and everything like that happens, you get some of that formulaic commercial development if you're not careful about giving enough flexibility. So we've adjusted the design elements. The first thing we did is we removed the option for the decorative split rail fencing. I mean, that's something someone can still do, but we're not going to try to promote it or give it credit. This kind of works a little bit against some of the pedestrian orientation that we're doing because we're pretty much that fence is always going to be put in right on the property line, that front property line. And so I'm going to have sidewalk and then a fence and then somebody's landscaping and things. And it just kind of creates a closed off feel for people who are walking. We've added in pedestrian open space such as parks, squares, piazzas, greens, and like just green space and plazas. And then specifically mentioned that the pedestrian open space has to be programmed. So you can't just say, oh, I'm leaving this little green field. That's my pedestrian open space that checks that box. But you've got to consider it and you've got to put in things that activate that space, whether it be benches or visual pieces of public art or other things, walking trails, something to create a good sense and feel of it. We've also added a public art option, which is a really great thing that we can hopefully start getting folks to do in the community. This, again, really helps champion and helps solidify that identity of Garden Ridge as we get local folks putting in murals or public art sculptures and things like that. The trick on public art, unfortunately, is a lot of people want to cheap out on it and do something kind of on the super cheap and say, yeah, there's my piece of public art. Here it is. It's leftover building materials that I just made into this thing. Well, the kind of one of the ways to deal with this is that we just tossed in a kind of arbitrary number of, it's got to equal roughly 1% of the overall project cost, so that we're not just getting somebody cheaping out, calling something art when that's not the spirit and intent of what we're shooting for. Additionally, it also has to be outside and visually and physically available to the public. It doesn't have to be available all of the time, but probably like during normal business hours, things like that. The goal of this, again, isn't to say, oh, we've got this lovely stuff that we keep inside. That covers my public art, right? No, that's not what we're shooting for. And then the last piece is that it doesn't contain advertisements for businesses or products, right? Can't double dip in that mural. Inherently, building murals will bring in more. They kind of do a little bit of advertising because they provide visual interest and people stop by. But we want to make sure that somebody's not just kind of turning into a cartoon their business logo or what they sell or things like that, and really pushing this branding piece that doesn't work for the community, right? We want that art to kind of go tenant to tenant, or as that building turns over and somebody else buys it, it still works for the community. Is that my last one? Perfect. Okay. I was like, am I at the end? So, with that's the kind of high-level changes. And as y'all get into the discussion, please feel free to ask me whatever questions you have, and I'll do my best to answer them or give my recommendation and professional planning opinions. So, thank you very much.
Great job, Bryce. Thank you. I like how you can make a subject like zoning entertaining, educational, and it's always a pleasure to have you up here and speak.
Thank you very
so
much.
Okay, so a lot of those changes, that's the high-level look at the changes, proposed changes, would help us with the development of the city, specifically what the rest of the property available. We don't own any of it, but property owners do, but attracting developers to come in for the properties that are still vacant along FM 2252 and FM 3009. What we have done in the past year with DFW Strategic Communications is we've rebranded the city with our Garden Ridge logo, not the city seal, that remains the same. But we've rebranded the city with Garden Ridge logo, and we've given it a new tagline, Naturally Home. I had a opportunity to speak at Randolph Metrocom Rotary on Monday, and gave them an update of Garden Ridge, and took that new logo and tagline, Naturally Home, for a spin in front of that roughly about 50 people, and it worked. They liked it. I gave them the background of why we were doing that, and they said, hey, that's a really good idea. So when we make changes to our zoning ordinance, that is, we will also market the city of Garden Ridge going forward. And that's something we're going to talk about a week from tonight, next Wednesday's meeting, of how best to market the city to attract the right development that fits our zoning and help. We can't control what goes in, but we can influence. Is that a good way to say it, Bryce? Okay.
Excuse me, Mayor.
Yes.
Again, I want to specify or cover that the presentation that Bryce made was the changes in the draft zoning ordinance from the one that was P and Z presented at the September public hearing. At that meeting, there was a presentation, PowerPoint, that was presented to the city, the changes from the current 13. That covers all the changes. This only covers the changes from the draft. So there's more information that was in the packet that Marissa sent out on March 11th that has that presentation as well. So let's be sure that this does not cover all the changes in the ordinance. This only covers the changes from the draft ordinance. So there's the other presentation that covers everything else.
Thanks for that clarification, Jesse. Absolutely. Okay, so how do we want to go forward with this? You want to talk about slide by slide? You want to go through what Jesse was just talking about from the packets? How do you want to do this? Jesse, how do you want to do it?
So Kay and I have been familiar with pretty much, so, right? So with this, I'll kind of ask him, what do you and the other council members want to do? How far back you want to go through all the changes? Because Marissa has the other presentation up, I guess, or if you want to do that one. Do you want to do this one?
Let's go through that.
Okay, so this covers the whole changes from the current ordinance. So in this presentation covers, it went back to the master land use plan that was developed in 2017, and then it covers the new ordinance and the changes from it. So, so I'll just go in from there. Again, the plan was developed by, the master land use plan was developed back in, 2017, 2018? I think you were part of council then, so you're familiar with that part, and so, did y'all look at this presentation to begin with? Okay, asked the two, okay. So I'm not gonna go into detail. Let's just go on to the, the special areas. Let's go to the changes, actually. I want to cover them. Is this it? Yeah. So we got new zoning, we got new districts that are created specifically to, specific for nature and the components permitting development within them. So here are the new zoning districts. Can I get the, be easier if you just, instead of you trying to guess what I'm doing. Thank you. Okay. So here are the new zoning districts. And the next slide actually, well, let me go figure out where I'm at here. Come on, where am I? How come it's not? I'm hitting the wrong button. I guess I'm trying, yeah, but I don't have access to here, do I? There, now I hit the wrong, yeah, I was just trying to scroll but I hit the button up there and it worked. Okay, so here's the body. Pedro is on on the left is the current zoning, the current zoning districts is on the right, and the new ones are on the left. So you can see the ones that just changed in names, they're basically the same. In residential zoning, we give them a different name, basically. Those, the new one, residential neighborhood, RN, is a new district, okay? And then we go down to the non-residential uses, and so the current B1 and B2 is now the, well, what do we have here? Previous, yeah. I'm confused here a little bit. Okay, yeah. So the current B1 and B2 are now community commercial and neighborhood commercial. We just, again, changed those. The new ones are the overlay districts, the neighborhood mixed-use overlay and the community mixed-use overlay. And then in light industrial zones, just change the code on those two. Go ahead.
Jesse,
If
if I
you wanna
may,
speak.
I'd say if you might explain the overlay district.
Okay, I think we'll do it in the future slides, don't we? Yeah. But again, here are the residential zoning districts, and we'll go into each one of these. Ag is formerly the RA district, basically no changes. This would include the land within the city limits, mainly for rural, maintain the rural character, for agricultural activities or cultural uses. So again, basically no uses no changes in that one. Same thing with residential. We maintain the 3/4 acre lots. And this one, the Country Club district was formerly included in here, and now it's in its own standalone district. This is the new one. So this is mainly for moderately density, medium density. We're not calling it high density. We're calling it moderate because we're limited to 4 units per acre. And this is one change that Bryce covered. Instead of being 10,000 square foot lots, which was 0.223 acres, that was changed to 1/4 acres. That's what Bryce covered in his change, to make it uniform on fractions of acres instead of square feet. Okay? And again, medium density will now be permitted in residential estate districts. And don't have it on here, but it does require connection to the sewer system, wastewater system. Okay? And right now, it can only be placed in special planning area 5. So if you go to that master plan, the plan, this one, yeah, it's in this area right here. Okay? Yep. Okay? Okay. So now, oh, I see what you did. Then non-residentials, these are the non-residential areas, so we'll cover those. Go back to here. This is the formerly B2 office and professional district. Essentially, no changes from here. I just kind of highlighted what was covered in there. It's providing goods and services, generally located adjacent to or integrated to within neighborhoods. And we already have some of this in place, so we just got new name for it. Community commercial districts is formerly B1, so it's intended to provide areas, for retail, commercial activities along, arterial streets, primarily serve residents within 3 or 5 miles, which is what 2252 is. Should have pedestrian access to adjacent residential areas, the kind of thing Bryce covered also earlier about, cross-pathing in there, connecting. He just clarified, he took more and clarified this area a little bit better on that. Should not be permitted along residential streets or residential collector streets unless located at intersection with an arterial street. So here's the mixed-use overlay district. This is neighborhood. Intended to provide a mixed-use urban fabric with a wider range for building type setbacks and street types. Intended to reinforce appropriate scale development, encourage the use, that are compatible with existing residential areas, and provide a transition, from residential neighborhood to mixed-use area. These are, in that map, they're areas 3, 4, and 5. So if I go to that, right? Yeah. So 3, 4, and 5. So this is, again, you look at 2252, 3009, right here, and 5, we're at the other side. Okay?
Jesse, before you
Yeah, go
go
ahead.
on, let's talk about,
Yeah.
as FM 2252 is modified and widened to 4-lane, there's a walking trail that's going to go in just past Tonkawa Pass, all along the north side, northwest side of FM 2252.
Correct.
That would extend through the intersection 3009 and keep going as far as how far they end up taking 2252 past that intersection. So that's what we're talking about with 3, 4, and 5, the ability to walk down Batcave Road or walk out of the forest off of Tonkawa Pass and walk to restaurants and retail and things like that so we don't have to drive everywhere. So, did I explain that?
Yeah.
Good? All right.
Perfect.
Well, all right.
Great
Thanks.
addition, thank you, sir. Okay. So, community mixed-use districts. This is, will provide a higher density mixed-use fabric accommodating retail, office, and residential use. So the main difference between this one and neighborhood is it does allow for residential use within this district. Okay? Again, it's, everything else is the same here, and again, it's the same special planning areas, 3, 4, and 5. So, going back to here, okay, I thought 2 was in there, but 2 is not in there. Is 2 included in that? Maybe I missed that on the chart. I thought 2 should be included in that one, because that's the one we primarily talked about, that one, so that's an error on the chart then. I remember that was being discussed, and I think I forgot that one, so that one should include 2 on here.
And could possibly include, in the other district, the neighborhood,
Oh, yes, yeah.
2 could also be included in that district.
So maybe we left it off of that one. I think that might have been a correction that we didn't get changed on this chart. Okay,
Jesse, go back one, just to make sure that Kelly is up to speed on a little bit of history here,
on which one? This,
the map.
the map?
Yeah.
Okay,
So that property 2 that you see in blue, Kelly, that's a 62-acre plot. That's right, Marissa, right? 62 acres that obviously the city doesn't own. But what the master plan, when we approve that, that would be like a mixed-use area. Think of driving up to Green, and like literally you wouldn't be able, it'd be a walkable street, but not necessarily driving through it. It'd be the gateway to Garden Ridge, maybe even walk through a big overhang gateway that says Garden Ridge with mixed use in there. So retail, restaurants, again, someplace to go and eat with your family and shop and not have to leave the city of Garden Ridge. Does that make sense? Okay, that's the history on that one.
yeah, and the reason it was included in here is because, maybe one day it gets sold, we want to be sure we got it covered and what it could be, And one thing that I guess we want to point out is, yes, this does not automatically rezone any of these areas, but it's got to be permitted per this drawing before it can be rezoned to it. So if somebody asks for, a service that doesn't fit this map, then, the map's got to be changed first. So city council has to approve the change first before we can, redistrict that, so. Correct, Nancy? Yes.
Otherwise, it's a spot zoning, which we can't.
Right, yeah, okay. Okay, covered those. So light industrial, So this one stayed the same, LI, currently the same, so no changes really here.
Jesse, real quickly,
Yes, ma'am.
on light industrial, I mean, I see these examples, business park, light industry, office warehousing. I'm always a little bit concerned when I see that light industrial right across from Regency Oaks. We know we always get a lot of pushback on things that we put
Right here?
across the street. Yeah,
Yeah.
yeah. Just saying it out loud.
Yeah, I mean, good point. I mean,
Section next to section 4.
yes, right
Yeah.
here, that's the only light industrial area we have. Is that currently zoned light industrial by any chance?
Yeah.
So it's already zoned that way?
Yeah. We'll hear about it.
And has been for a number of years.
Right.
So that's not a change here, it's just like this heavy industrial here, right? This one?
Yes.
That heavy industrial's already been rezoned that way. This one here,
Talk about that
yeah,
next week.
right. So. Okay, yeah. Okay, what happened to heavy industrial? Okay, and then we got one called P, Public and Institute District. This covers community centers, parks, libraries, schools, things like that. They were, I think it wasn't originally defined in the current 13. And then we have these special zoning districts, and we're familiar with some of these. The aquifer, that came up during the quick trip, issue of how far you can be from the 1,500 feet radius from any, thing, so we all know about that one. Nothing was changed, there's really no changes from the current ordinance here. So this is the same, it just. And the natural features overlay, and this was changed per Bryce's presentation earlier, but the buffer versus overlay, right? That the words? Yeah. So that changed in the wording in the text when this was presented. One thing that I'll put in here, but, we have council can actually, this is not something probably a property owner's gonna ask for, to come in here and tighten their requirements. So it's something maybe council may want to consider, just applying to properties along 3009 or 2252. We can do that. We can rezone those to put this overlay district in there. Okay? And this one, I think I'd rather have Cynthia talk about this one.
Hello. Are we there? There we go. And I'm going to completely cheat because these days, because we have a planner, I have the right to defer to our planner. What I can tell you is that a plan unit development is a perfectly legal means of establishing a district that allows for more flexibility, from the zoning restrictions, but Bryce can give us a lot better detail of what does that mean? How does it work? What does that create?
Appreciate it.
So this is, if we think of zoning districts like a pizza menu, and the restaurant's got a bunch of pre-built pizzas that are their specialty pizzas, we've got those, and then you get to build your own pizza. That's what a planned unit development essentially is. So it's the ability to come in and customize a zoning district specific for a development. And so we put in rules about minimum sizes, some other things, so that we don't get folks trying to skirt the rules and do a planned unit development, but really have creative, interesting concepts that work. They just don't work as well in a standard zoning district. And the general rule on this is that we use planned unit developments, and the city typically will approve them when the development that is proposed is a better overall development than what we would get under straight zoning. And so these are the areas where we look at, building separations or specific, maybe buffering requirements between properties or things like that, where we may not need those things whenever it's master planned out and really thought through. And so we can use the planned unit development district to reduce zoning regulations in certain areas and also apply additional regulations that maybe the city doesn't regulate or are above and beyond in kind of a negotiation and a give and take. It's a really fantastic tool to have on the books. I will tell you, in my experience with it, it takes special patient developers to go through it because this is a very long, typically long zoning process because there's a lot of back and forth conversation with staff beforehand. They can take a couple months to a couple years, but it's just a really great tool.
Thank you for that, Bryce, 'cause no, I gotta cover that. So, any questions for him at that point? Okay. Sure.
At another council meeting last night where there was a really rousing public hearing regarding the use of a planned unit or a planned use development. And here was the issue, is that the property was zoned commercial, so the property owner was able to put in a building up to 3 stories in height as the base usage. The property owner had approached the city and said, if you will allow me to do the planned use, which would give me 4 stories, I will upgrade this property and provide y'all a lot of extra goodies, which in turn is going to result in a higher ad valorem base for that property, for the taxes, but in addition to that, basically a 25% increase for sales tax. And so the issue is do we just allow them to build what they can legally build there and get whatever we get? Or do we give a little bit and allow them to have that additional story and then have this goodie, that goodie, you know? And so there was a lot of, there was a lot of folks, set up on either side of it saying, no, give them nothing, they build what they build. The problem with that approach is you get what you get. And you lose your negotiating tool for anything extra, because so long as they build to the absolute minimum standard, they've complied with the law. And that doesn't necessarily comply with the spirit of what you want built in those areas. And so, planned use development just really gives the city so many more bargaining tools to get, as Bryce mentioned, a much better product. You may have to give a little bit, but what you get in return is of significant value normally for the city.
Bryce, give us an example, if you would, of on the map. So let's go to the map of how we would apply this.
Sure. So very rarely are planned unit developments city initiated. Almost always is it a property owner coming in with a development concept. So you mentioned earlier our planning area number 2 and its goal of we'd love to have this sign and have it say these things and be this great gateway. I'll tell you, you don't have a requirement in your code for a gateway. So if you want that and you want to guarantee that you get it, a planned unit development is one way that you can have that negotiation. The trade-off, I'm sure, will be maybe impervious cover or something like that, or clustering of development so that we can maintain an overall impervious cover, but maybe the individual lots are greater, right? Where we may have something where we've got individual lots that are 80 or 90%, but the development as a whole is still within that 75, right? You wouldn't let them build it pursuant to the code individually under a straight zoning district that way, because each lot would then violate the provisions of the code. But we can do different things like that, and so you can get that really unified, cohesive development, because unfortunately, while, like your example in green, a lot of those, the property lines don't look like what you see out there. And so a lot of them are a lot tighter, or individual buildings that look like, hey, that's multiple buildings on one lot. Nope, they're individually platted and owned and things like that. And so this just gives the city another tool to kind of create that look and feel and those things that you want, and also get those guarantees. I'm sure that there have been folks that have come to council that have said, like, look, just give me this thing that I want and I'm going to do this beautiful building. And the answer is, well, we can't make you do that building. Like, we hope that you will, but there's no legal ability for us to force that. This opens the door to say, yeah, that's great. If you want to do it like that, we're going to put that as an exhibit to the ordinance, and you have to build it like this, for example, within limited amounts that state law lets us, obviously.
That was perfect. Thank you. All right, Jesse, keep
Okay,
going.
Go back to here. Okay. Okay, now we go into land use regulations. Land and buildings each have it in its own districts. We've used, specific uses, and we have a whole charts available for that. And I think the next slides cover all these. So in the ordinance, there's several pages, but this is the code for it. P is permitted by right. There's no, currently right now, if somebody wants to do something special, they may have to, do a special permit request. And this new chart will allow it to happen without a permit. It's allowed already. So if it's P with a number, then it references a certain section, conditions that are required for that permit requirement. Same thing with special. S is a special use permit, and that's with a number, tells you a certain section in the ordinance where to go to and look. And the key one here is X. X means it is prohibited. You can't have that service or use in these areas. So, so all the next few slides all have every slide that you have in your charts, in your package. So unless you have a specific question on one of these, we can skip over these. Okay, so let me just for clarification, here's PL, and that's the paragraph that it associates with, for example, just for reference there, because the next one I go into is to cover some of those. So here's where it says specific uses. You may have the letter A through M require a certain section, and all I did was take out from here was three topics: dwelling, accessory dwellings, garage sales, and short-term rentals. And so of all those other ones, we just cover it in this overview, those three items, but there's quite a few of them. So accessory dwelling, no more than one dwelling shall be located on one lot. Accessory dwelling can be occupied by a guest, caregiver, relative, and family member. And located in the residential districts, cannot be used for cannot be used for commercial purposes other than authorized and legitimate home occupations. So if you have an office or something like that. I think there's a chart that has, no, it doesn't. Okay. I thought we had detail a bit more over here, but not. So I think this was covered. Council had discussed this prior to a lot of these changes in the years past. Okay. Garage sales. This is new to the ordinance. This was not in the current 13 about limiting garage sales, and I think this is the current in here. Allowed only, or allowed in, agricultural, residential, RE, and residential neighborhood, the residential zone districts. Twice per year, between 8 and 5, not to exceed 3 days. And you can't have both of them within 5 days of each other. And another one, not continuous for 6 days, and you have to have a permit to conduct this. I think there's no charge for the permit. Yes, Nancy?
On page 70 of the proposed, on page 70 of the proposed ordinance is the chart you were referring to,
Oh, yeah,
Jesse,
okay.
about the number of accessory structures.
Going back to this one, yes. How come we only have? Okay, I thought there was more than one allowed. So anyway. Yeah, okay. Did I close it by accident?
It's page
Oh.
70, Marissa.
Are you bringing it up?
Right there. Table 6.
So this limits the size of them and the number depending on your size of lot. that chart's not really correct to this one. Okay? Thank you. Okay, I'm back. So go back to garage sales. Again, that's new. Short-term rentals, in the new ordinance, there, this covers anything, period, not less than one night or more than 30 days. Only commercial, short-term rentals is considered a commercial use and is prohibited in residential districts. Short-term rentals are permitted in these districts down here: neighborhood commercial, community commercial, neighborhood mixed use, and community mixed use. It requires a rental permit. Now, I think we ought to wait. I know we've had communications from residents, so we can cover that at that time. We can defer that discussion like we're doing the other ones, so. Here's a dimensional table that Bryce referred to with, has minimum lot size, setback, number of dwellings per acre, maximum building height, building coverage, and impervious cover. So here's a chart. And from this chart, the changes that Bryce covered already is around here. He covered those. We changed the 10,000 square feet to a quarter acre, and the 32, and all these other numbers went to acre size instead of, square feet. And then, I guess these changed right here, right? Those all changed to 75.
Building coverage, one right above it.
Was eliminated, right? That was
That was removed.
removed. Yeah, that was removed. Yeah. Yeah, that was removed. So again, this was from back in September, and the changes were after the September public hearing that P&Z had. Okay. This is really the one we had with accessory structures. I guess the other one was really accessory dwellings. Dwelling, so really only one dwelling per, where this one allows has that chart that I had here. I knew it was here somewhere. I hadn't seen this package in a while, so. Yeah, so one is dwellings where you can live in, and this one's more on, so again, we have several here. I just highlighted 3 of them: the accessories, structure, storage of use in buildings, and lighting. So this is what Nancy had referred to earlier for accessory structures and how many we're limited to. Since now you have residential neighborhood, RN, you can have less than 3/4 acre lots. That's why we limit the number of accessories there and the size accessories there. Current ordinance has that if you tie in a secondary garage by concrete, it doesn't count as a separate building. That's been eliminated in this ordinance. In other words, just because you tied it by concrete, it's another building. Okay. For example, I have a separate garage that now counts as part of the house, but in the future it wouldn't. So. Okay. Again, this is storage vehicles. Bryce covered some of this, some of the changes that have been done to this. So, again, we've had comments on that. We'll refer to that separately. And then lighting. Regulate outdoor lighting to reduce and prevent, pollution in the city, dark skies, basically. Here's some of the supplemental regulations around visibility triangles. When you get to an intersection, can you see at the corners? We have separate sign regulation here versus our sign ordinance 55. Outdoor antennas, tree preservation, maintenance, and disease prevention, and flagpoles. That was all, and some of those was in the current ordinance, and we just maintained that. Okay? So that covers, this was the presentation that P&Z used back in September for the public hearing back then. And then the public hearing that was held in, was that March? or February. That's the one that had to cover, that changes that Bryce covered. So, gives a little bit more background. So, back to
You
you,
go back two
Yeah.
slides.
2 slides.
Just thinking about something. Go, keep going back. Okay. So using you have a detached garage.
Yes, sir.
Okay. And right now, because it's connected via concrete, I'm assuming that it counts as one.
As one.
But if we pass this, then suddenly it becomes two.
Well, it's grandfathered, isn't it, to a point, or what? Unless I make a change.
So let's talk about grandfather. So
Yeah.
what does that mean, and how do we track that?
Okay, so grandfathering is the colloquial term for a structure that has become non-conforming because new regulations have gone into effect. And the rules are is whatever exists, so long as it was legally in existence at the time that the new regulations went into effect, it will stay as is until such time that it needs to be amortized by, fill in the blank with whatever conditions we've placed in the ordinance. So our ordinance says that if something becomes, for instance, Jesse's garage, heaven forbid, Jesse's garage gets hit by lightning, and it is more than 50% destroyed, by that, he would now have to make sure that when he builds his new garage, that it has to comply with that current set of rules. So that if Jesse has also put up 2 or 3 other accessories on this, then the answer is going to be, I'm so sorry, you can't rebuild your garage. You can put up a carport, you can put up some sort of covering and whatever fancy words that the architects call such things, porticoches and all of that, but you don't get another garage because, in the meantime, you had 3 other, fill in the blank with whatever's non-conforming. And so that is, quote, how grandfathering works. So long as you were legal at the time that the new regulations went into effect. When there is a trigger point that says now you must come into compliance with the current rules on the books, you have to come into compliance.
So same thing means if I want to add additional, because right now that's the only additional structure I have. Now, if I want to add another building, now this one does count in that calculation.
Right,
So.
right.
It's not grandfathered any more than that, but.
Exactly,
Yeah.
exactly. So if you didn't have that additional structure, if you wanted to do that now and say, no, I'm connected, I don't have that many, it's like King's X.
Yeah, so right now I could add it. In the future, I may not be able to add additional.
Exactly.
How do we track that? We're going to talk about grandfathering here in a little while anyway, so how do we track that as a city? And then what happens when a home that is grandfathered is sold and a new owner comes in?
So for tracking purposes,
How do we enforce it?
you enforce it basically with what I'm going to go with is what's known, okay? Because within the city, your building inspector would have gone out there, there should be a paper trail of, this was built, and then this happened, and then this happened, and now we've got something here that's outside of compliance. Okay, so that's normally the way that most cities track for compliance and for non-conforming use and for enforcement of non-conforming use. It's not fail-proof, but that's kind of one of the issues. I do not know of any city that actually goes through and creates an inventory of properties that, so that you say, on this day, we took a snapshot, this is what's there. So it can become a fact issue, if it gets challenged. Because there's no fail-proof way, to ensure compliance other than, hey, one day, folks that are familiar with the city passed by and noticed X. So, and that frequently comes through city staff. So, city staff is out and about, doing their regular city business and they see something that's different, something that's changed. And then you send an inspector out and, knock, knock, city inspector, what's going on here? So those are the primary ways that you try to gain enforcement, because otherwise, like I said, absent, paying somebody to go out there and create an inventory that then must be always maintained and kept up to date. Those are the two ways that
Okay.
mostly happens with trying to inform or trying to enforce nonconforming or use rights.
Remind me what the ordinance currently says regarding this. It's not addressed.
Nonconforming?
No, as far as structures.
Oh,
So what does the current ordinance say as far as structures? I know we have to adjust it because we are doing a residential neighborhood.
right. So the ordinance currently allows for persons to connect via,
Yes,
for lack of a better term, a sidewalk to.
like concrete.
Yeah, a concrete, to a secondary, accessory dwelling,
it
something,
becomes
something.
one.
And they just have been attaching them by little strips of concrete and saying, oh, well, that means I only have one, and I still have room to put up something else. So that provision is going to be removed. Just the connection via sidewalk or a piece of concrete, it's not going to count, so that you have, tentacles going out to accessory structures counting as one building or one structure.
Okay,
Same thing also covers with the size of the structure. I think the current ordinance is limited to 1,000 square feet if it was separate. 1,000 square feet, yes. But if you tied it by concrete, it could be 4,500 square feet.
Right,
Yeah, there's no limit.
right, there's no limit on it.
So now we're gonna limit it to 3,000. Previously it was 1,000.
So, talk to me about like the gas station on the corner, like the Easy Mart. Another gas station could come in and buy that lot, that property, and their existing underground tanks would still be grandfathered in, or is that a trigger point?
The sale of property in and of it itself is never I won't say never, is rarely a trigger for making new regulations go into effect. What would trigger is, let's say, new buyer comes in, new gas station comes in and says, well, I want to go through and change the whole site plan for, for this property and make certain changes, to the gas pumps and fill in the blank. Those things are the actual trigger.
Okay.
If someone wanted to come in and construct a new service station at that corner, if they move those existing storage tanks, that would trigger them having to comply with our ordinance as to where their location is in perspective to our aquifer protection district.
Right, so it's aquifer protection, it's the, the setback regulations, all of those things.
But if they come in and they leave those tanks right there, there's nothing we can do.
Right, there,
Okay.
because as far as I know, none of that went in under some sort of specific use permit that had some sort of triggering mechanism to it.
So the grandfathering conveys with the property,
Right,
not the deal that was struck with the
right,
owner.
right.
Got it.
Grandfather's not defined anywhere in this ordinance, is it? Do we need to, or is it spelled out, or we just say non-conforming? I don't remember, and my computer died.
So the term that we use in regulation is non-conforming and not grandfathering,
Yeah, that's right.
because
So
it's
we've been-
very specific. The other piece that's important to all of this is that non-conforming assumes that the structure or use was legally conforming at some point, right? So just because somebody did something, if somebody illegally erects a garage without a permit or anything, and the rules change, that doesn't mean that the garage is grandfathered, because it was never done correctly to begin with. So,
Yeah, and by way of example, because I know Bryce and I conferred on this one for, for another client, property owners built a large storage unit, barn of some type, indicating that we're building on another piece of property elsewhere. We're going to come and we're going to store all of our stuff here on this property, on this barn that we allow, which, by the way, I don't know, do we have that in our ordinance? Anyways, Bryce and I are going to talk about that point here offline. But at any rate, so they built this very large barn, and then unbeknownst to the city, they went inside and basically turned that barn into, quote, a barn-dominium, so that it was now a rather nice apartment, on the inside. And so now it was transformed to having residential use in a zoning district that didn't permit residential use. And then, of course, all of the interior that had been changed had been done so without buildings or inspections. Fast forward, that property is trying to sell for a large chunk of money. And, the city is being threatened with a lawsuit because you're messing with my sale. No, we're not. You can sell that all you want to, and you can advertise that however you want to. But the bottom line is should somebody want to have residential use there, we're gonna issue some paperwork to them, and we're gonna say nope, because that is not a permitted use there. It was never allowed. You never rezoned. You didn't permit. You didn't inspect. We can't give you a certificate of occupancy. If you're going to use this property for anything else other than what it's zoned for, so if you've got some other commercial use or something, you're just kind of stuck. And they're like, well, that messes with our sales. Like, that is not our problem, because the city didn't create that problem. You did when you thought nobody would ever figure out what you did inside. So yeah, so that's the best example I can give of the difference between non-conforming and just plain not permitted, illegal construction.
Thank you. I think this is a good time for a break. Let's take 7 minutes. We'll come back at 2:30. Good.
Oh, I was gonna say.
Let's, as we continue with this work session, and with the emphasis that we talked about at the beginning of the meeting, we have to get this right. So we've got the background now. Let's continue the discussion with what we can do and what conformance means, is grandfathered, all that stuff. And it is okay to not finish today and to actually come up with another work session in June where we can reconvene and then hopefully be able to approve it and then schedule a public hearing. So the way we want to do the public hearing would be with, at a council meeting. So July 13th for that next one after June. Or that first Wednesday in August as well, to get all this right. So it wouldn't require a motion to schedule another work session. It would just be a consensus. So, okay. With that said, let's keep the conversation going. I don't plan to go past 3:30 as we continue this conversation. So we can end sooner as well. Everybody like that? Thumbs up? Okay, good. Okay, so now we have the background, and Jesse did an awesome job of giving us additional background. That was great. Oh, that was great. And we have all the experts in the room. So one of the things that trouble's not the right word, even though I just said it. One of the things that causes me pause and a little bit of concern is, are we, with some of these numbers and number of lots, are we coming up with a solution do we have a solution in search of a problem? So we, using Jesse's garage at the moment, it's one structure, and then we change it so it's going to be actually two structures, and suddenly we have someone that was in compliance, did conform to the ordinance, and now they're out of conformance, and they're grandfathered in. Is there a problem with the way we do it right now in the city? I mean, what are we trying to do here why are we coming up with this? So explain that to me a little bit more. Okay, that'd be great.
Excuse me, just from personal knowledge, as pointed out by Cynthia, there are some properties in the city that were able to create multiple structures on their property just by making a 7 or 8 foot sidewalk out to like a pool house or an outdoor kitchen, something like that. So they end up with a cluttered, in my opinion, my word, piece of property with multiple, what we would call structures on them, but because they were able to create sidewalks, literally sidewalks, from the main structure to these structures, their yard is just stacked with structures.
Okay, so that's your opinion, right? And, well, but you don't like that, and I understand that. But would these properties suddenly be out of conformance? And then what do we do with that?
Well, just like if I can use an example,
Please.
This is totally off the cuff, but for example, our sign ordinance, when someone creates a sign now, and if that sign, as that sign deteriorates or needs to be replaced, it must comply with the current ordinance at the time of rebuild or whatever you have, redesign and so on. To me, it's the same. It's essentially the same concept. I do realize that, yes, if someone has half a dozen structures on their property now and and one needs to be repaired or not, well, we have a percentage of repair, but needs to be demolished or rebuilt or whatever like that, I think that calls for special use. I think that calls for, a variance request, and we address it that way. I don't think, I think it goes against, I think structures, it's been a bugaboo. I think structures, I think the definition of structures has been lacking for some time. And I think that, I think it goes to the character of the city, the appearance of the city. I think what any given, those of us who don't live in an HOA, for example.
Okay.
I don't know.
No,
Yeah.
you helped me kind of work through that, so good, thank you. Maybe let's come back to that. Let's talk about short-term rentals. So what does our current ordinance say regarding short-term rentals, residential?
We have no regulations on the books for short-term rentals.
Okay. Can we, as the governing body of the city of Garden Ridge, pass an ordinance like that and restrict someone's ability to have an Airbnb from their home? Can we legally do that?
What I will tell you is that right now, the answer, and I'm going to give you an attorney answer, and I'm glad I'll be out of reach. The answer is a definitely firm maybe. There is a lot of case law that is still currently being made regarding short-term rentals. The laws currently on the books, frequently are tailored to a certain set of facts, but don't have an overarching rule or bright line rule that says, yes, you can, no, you can't. So what I can tell you for sure is that challenges to short-term rentals based on property covenants, restrictive covenants, in other words, something in the deed, have been very, very narrowly construed. And those persons who have challenged somebody having a short-term rental on their property have, in the 2 or 3 Seminole cases, have lost their cases because the deed was not written with sufficient detail to make it absolutely clear that somebody could not do a short-term rental on the property. So in that respect, short-term rentals, unless your deed says very specifically no short-term rental, persons can potentially do short-term rental. So that's one aspect of it. Texas courts have also ruled on short-term rentals within HOAs, so that the HOAs rules have been supported in certain circumstances, saying, yep, you're right, that's a violation of the HOA rule, you can do so. There's also cases out there that says, your HOA rules aren't written with such clarity that we can say for sure, and so the answer is you lose. There's no, quote, HOA rule against a short-term rental, so that property owner can continue on with that short-term rental. There are short-term rental cases for properties along the coastline of Texas where persons specifically purchase those properties in, for lack of a better term, kind of a resort town or resort city for the express purpose of using that property not as their homestead, not as their primary residential location, but for the express purpose of using that as a short-term rental. And definitely, I think 2 cases in particular have said nope. City, you lose. And in that particular instance, what the city went from was some regulations to an absolute prohibition of short-term rental. So that's a big issue. So for those particular cases, the court said, if you're moving to an absolute prohibition of short-term rentals, then that is unconstitutional because, and they set out the legal test and legal requirements for why the property owner won, which was in this case, it was a resort town. The expectation of the property owner was that they would use that property for that specific purpose. And 3, the regulation interfered with that purpose, and ergo, the city had inversely condemned that property. In other words, the regulation was so restrictive, the property owner couldn't use their property for and get their investment-backed expectation. So right now, the rulings are coming down very specific as to very set facts and circumstances. Most importantly, the 2 biggest cases as applied to Garden Ridge for short-term rental regulations is that the city of Austin was the first city really to go forth and put through a cohesive plan of short-term rental regulations. And they've been challenged on numerous times. Some of their regulations did not withstand challenge, some of them did. Most recently, the city of Arlington was challenged, and let me verify. So the city of Arlington had very similar regulations to the city of Austin. However, like everybody else, they waited, until some court rulings came through, and then they adjusted their regulations. So an appeals court ruling came out in 2021, wherein, and I'm just going to read it directly here, homeowners who challenged 2 city ordinances restricting short-term rentals failed to show that either ordinance violated their equal protection rights. Homeowners who leased their properties to other on a short-term basis were not similarly situated to property owners who leased their properties long-term. So that's one of the big issues. The court made a distinction between the different types of leases. The ordinances were rationally related to the legitimate state interest of safeguarding the life, health, safety, welfare, and property of short-term rental occupants. So that's a big issue there, because when courts look for constitutionality, there are 3 levels, a 4th level that is not necessarily applicable here, but there are 3 levels of hurdles that you have to cross to determine, and the courts say, depending on what you're trying to regulate, there's a low hurdle, which is rational basis. There's the intermediate basis, which says it's more than rational but less than strict scrutiny. And then there's the highest basis, which is absolute strict scrutiny. So the Arlington court said rationally related, so that tells us you just have to clear that lowest bar to ensure that your ordinance is constitutional, which is, does it serve a legitimate state interest of safeguarding life, property, health, safety, all of those things that we normally have to watch out for in our ordinances anyways. Okay. Short-term occupants, neighborhoods, and the general public, and minimizing the adverse impacts resulting from transient rental uses in neighborhoods planned for single-family residents by maintaining the residential character and integrity of those neighborhoods and reducing nuisance violations and vehicle overparking. All right. So the city set out in its ordinance what they were trying to target, what the issues were with allowing short-term rental in a strictly residential neighborhood. So that ruling came out in September of 2021. That ruling was appealed to the Supreme Court of Texas, and it was submitted to the Supreme Court for a request for review. And as of a little bit earlier this afternoon when I checked, the Supreme Court had declined to take up the case to issue a ruling. And really when you appeal to the Supreme Court, what you're trying to get the Supreme Court to do is, please tell us what to do with these 4, 5, 6, 7 different rules we have regarding short-term rentals. And the Supreme Court said, thank you, but no. So that is where we're at, is that there is support via the Arlington case that says if you meet, check off the certain boxes, your short-term rentals regulations may actually survive challenge. But without that Supreme Court ruling and without, some state law, some definitive state law guidance that tells us whether we're preempted or not preempted, the answer still remains maybe.
Thanks, Cynthia.
Maddening at best. Maddening at best. So what I know that what we have done here in our ordinance, which is kind of taken the middle ground, which is saying we're not prohibiting short-term rentals. We allow for short-term rentals, but we have designated some zoning districts where it would be a much better match in use for those particular areas as opposed to the actual residential-only districts. And so what I will say is, we're just going to continue to monitor this because, if we're still 2 or 3 months out, there could be something else that comes up that tells us differently. And to my knowledge, there's no overarching, United States Supreme Court that, kind of would overrule all of these. So that's where we're at. And so it is maddening at best, but there's where we're at. And the question is, how long do we have to wait? We don't know. Because what I can tell you is that, for sign regulations, those of y'all that survived the sign regulations, we had to go through and change our sign regulations because there was a Supreme Court case that came out. We changed, and then there was challenge, and then there was challenge, and then there was challenge. And now Texas Supreme Court has given us another rule that we need to go through and apply. And that ruling just came out, actually, I believe now 4 weeks ago. And so an ordinance that I was smack dab in the middle of, I'm like, sorry, got to put the brakes on, guys, because now we got to change that again because the ruling just came out. So that's where we're at with short-term rentals.
So to put it in fighter pilot speak, sort of, right?
Sort of.
Okay.
Yeah,
That's
until
why I
such
flew
time,
that.
because we're 2022 right now, May 2022, and we're going to be gearing up for the legislative session in 2023, and state legislators are going to take another run at local government's ability to control what's happening within their cities. I'll say that politely. And it could be in a few months' time, we may be preempted because it got close in 2021 to where there were going to be laws put on the books that said, local governments, you can't regulate these at all. Here's going to be the state guidelines. It got close, it didn't pass. We'll see what 2023 does for us.
Thank you.
Sort of,
Sort of.
sort of. Which is why I say I'm glad I'm out of reach, because these answers are unsavory at best, and they're like, if you were that close.
Thank you. Council, I'd like to hear your opinions on this.
I have a question for Nancy first.
Go.
Do we know of any short-term rentals currently in Garden Ridge?
I am not aware of any.
Okay.
That doesn't mean that there aren't.
I know there was a property for sale, say, I don't know, 2014, 2015, that was trying to be sold as a short-term rental type, Airbnb. That was there, but that's all I remember, you know. I actually considered it and decided not to.
Kelly, speak.
Yes, sir. So do we know how New Braunfels has been successful at achieving this, or is that one of your aforementioned cities that you were discussing earlier?
You know, what I will say is New Braunfels thrives on tourism and you know, being a destination spot. And so, to my knowledge, they've got business regulations on their short-term rentals, which is different than land use regulations.
They have land use regulations.
Do they have land use
Yeah,
regulations?
so what's proposed in your ordinance is loosely similar. To my recollection on New Braunfels, they do not permit short-term rentals in their residential zoning districts, but they do allow it in their commercial zoning districts, and they've got a couple like tourism-based districts that they allow it in as well. So,
So like along the river, they can do short-term rentals, even though that's in a residence area.
yeah, so, well, and that's the thing, is they've got a lot of districts that kind of cross the boundaries between residential and commercial. They have it I believe they have it as a named land use on their land use chart. They also have, or used to, and I think it's still on the books, they also allowed single-family residential land use in every zoning district. So, I mean, they end up with houses in places that are not zoned for houses, because either it was existing and it was like that and they've had neighborhoods convert, or the allowance that they have of allowing a single-family detached residence in every zoning district.
Okay.
The reason why I ask is because I've personally tried to invest over there, and I've been shot down like 3 or 4 times now. And a couple of those locations have been along the river, so I just didn't know what you guys' experience had been, or if you guys had dealt with that.
And there's 2 things to keep in mind, is that regulations go through 2 tracks, right? So there's the land use regulation that says where you can do it at, you know, this zoning district, that zoning, or the other. And then there's the straight up business regulations. And some cities have said, we're not going to worry about the land use regulation portion of it. We're just going to do some business regulations that says, you know, you have to show us that you've got your permit. You have to show us, you know, that you meet certain requirements. You've got enough parking and you can't create nuisances. And so they've got business, just regular business regulations. And so, and then others kind of, you know, have, you know, the 2 pieces working together. And so just, you know, and I put that out there because, you know, I don't know if this is, as Mayor said, you know, we have a solution to a problem we don't have yet, or, you know, is this something that we are definitely wanting to think about regulating? So, you know, there's some options there.
Also, and I just, the name of the app slipped my mind, but there's, if we're gonna be proactive on this, and we do incorporate something, there is a pool lease program now where you can rent out your backyard and your pool. So I think anything we incorporate has to include that as well. So and
Okay, that one's a
I'll
new
get the
one.
name. So yeah, I have friends that have done it, but they live out in the country. But I know it's starting to catch on, and so I can just see it coming down the pipeline for us too. So.
You know, on that, I thought I heard that there was a lawsuit in New Braunfels from a homeowner, you know, on short-term rentals, just recently, so. Yeah.
I don't
You
know,
could
but
probably do some research.
I was going to say, I'll make sure to and y'all bear with me, I have this lovely laptop computer in front of me, but for some reason or another, when I write things down, my brain does a better job of remembering.
The name of the company is called Swimply, or it's an app. It's a, it's a, kind of like VRBO, I guess you'd say, but for renting people's pools in their backyards out.
Lisa, what do you have to say about this?
I can confirm that this pool thing that Kelly's talking about is real. There was recently a post in the, I don't remember if it was New Braunfels Moms on Facebook or whatever, with somebody advertising their pool. And there were several people saying, we rented it, it was great. We had our party, our graduation party there, our birthday party there. So it happens. I don't know if it'll happen in Garden Ridge, but it does happen. This is one of those, to use the word maddening, this is one of those as a council member that I struggle with a little bit, because my job as a council member is to really reflect the will of as many citizens I can, right? I'm supposed to reflect what the community wants in their community. And I have only heard from a couple of people that approve of short-term rentals, and those are people that have second houses here. They have a primary house and then one they're not so sure what they're doing with, and it would be advantageous or lucrative for them to have a short-term rental. So this is one where the law may not let me vote in a way that helps my citizens, our citizens, and that's frustrating to me. So,
Jesse?
Yeah, I go back and forth. I know when we first talked about this came up here, in the past with council, and it came to P&Z to discuss. And now seeing the comments we received in, emails, you kind of wonder which is the right thing to do. Especially with those lawsuits out there, potential here and there. And it's not in the ordinance, we don't have it in the ordinance today. It's something new, something where I think we really need to consider if it's the right thing or not, I'm not sure at this point which way I'd go.
Okay.
I'm not sure either. You have to go back and look HOA versus non-HOA as well, because of course HOA can't do less than the city, but they can do more than. And so I don't know. It is a confusing issue. I can see pros and cons. As Lisa said, there are people who have second and even third homes. Are we restricting the right of their use of their property? I don't know. I just don't know. I don't know where I am on it.
Those are all really, really good points. Jesse?
Yeah, I go back, the other thing I have pushing everybody, if we had any, that means that's potential hotel tax income at the same time. So there could be a plus to having them.
Don't say hotel out loud.
Yeah,
So we were at an Airbnb north of Flagstaff, Arizona over spring break, and I looked at our bill, and there was no city tax, hotel tax or whatever. No. Hot tax? Yeah. There wasn't on the bill. Yep. So I looked into that. And that was right after the one person that came to the P&Z meeting that spoke about it. So that's something I looked at, because I'm like, hey, is that a revenue source for us, right? So,
The answer is it can be if you want it to be.
So in Texas, they are obligated to pay hotel occupancy tax.
So-
Most of the companies, the booking companies, in my experience, will only collect the state portion, if anything. But that does not prevent, the requirement is still there for that operator to remit hot tax to the city.
okay. So I've only heard one comment, either via email or in person, regarding this. Have you guys had other people contacting you with email? I know it's only been a week, but,
same person problem.
okay.
Yeah.
Okay, some really good things to think about.
And
Yeah,
if I
go
may add, so, yeah, our HOA has discussed it, and it's a very hot topic right now, so, and I think it was like 90, from what I remember, is 100% that was all not for it. So,
Okay, that's a-
was against,
That was at the HOA meeting, right?
yeah.
Okay.
Is it currently in your covenants or anything, or nothing? No?
Yeah, it doesn't address it.
Okay, neither does George Ranch. So I brought that up, bring it up at the annual meeting next month. So, next week, actually.
I think
And Mayor, if I could, I'm so sorry, Councilwoman. I'm just going to throw this out there. Bryce is working on an additional tool that would have, I think, some good reference points for y'all. It's just going to take him a little bit of time to finish putting it together so he can, and we'll provide that as you know, as soon as he can put that together.
Thank you.
Kind of helps you solidify some of the concepts.
If I may,
Yeah.
the concept of, and I don't mean transient in a negative sense, but if you have a transient population, if someone is renting their property and it's a very desirable property, like with a big pool and so on and so forth, and they rent it out to a different family, different group, I think it complicates it for the neighborhood, if you will, to monitor, because these people, whether they're renting a very nice property or not, they may or may not be as careful about the property or their parking or their loud noise or whatever. And if I had an Airbnb next to me, I'd be the one that would have to probably register a complaint or something, and then that just gets tricky. I think it's not unlike our code compliance issue.
Yeah, that's a really, really good point. Are you guys okay to table this and go on to another discussion with the 27 minutes that we could still go? All right, let's talk about RVs. I have had comments, negative in person about that. I haven't received any negative emails. The emails that I have received, I think, are some of the same ones that you all have received, talking about responsible ownership and storage in the city of Garden Ridge of someone's recreational vehicle. So before I continue with that, let's go around the dais and tell me your thoughts on the proposed changes.
Well, our HOA prohibits them, so, but on my drive over here today, I drove by 5, of them. So are they an eyesore? Yeah, personally, for me, have I heard, like you said, we represent citizens of our city, and I have heard a lot of complaining about them. Where do you draw the line with them, and how big, and where they're sitting, and so, yeah, I consider it an issue.
Maybe what we need to do first is talk about what we currently have in the ordinance regarding recreational vehicle storage and the changes. Marissa, can you help us with that? So it should be in like 20607, right? The same paragraph. No? Has it changed?
Section 5.11.
The draft ordinance the draft zone ordinance version from last June has similar words that what's in 13, current 13, if I remember. The draft that changed with the current you have now, changed, P and Z changed it earlier this year. So,
Okay, so what are we proposing that we change here? Talk me through that. I mean, I've read it. What are we trying to do here? What are the changes?
the biggest change, what I see here, is in paragraph B, that the RVB still can be to the side, but it has to be behind a screen area. That's the biggest change. That's from the current 13. Am I correct? Somebody. $73. Yeah.
A1 and 2 really don't change.
Right.
Right.
Okay.
So it cannot be
One-
parked in the front or exterior side, so corner lots. That stays the same.
The new ordinance is requiring, that they shall be generally screened from view from the public right of way by being placed behind the structure or behind a 6-foot fence or wall.
So Marissa,
Whereas-
yeah. Marissa, on paragraph B, if you could, on line 3, from shall, if you could highlight, yeah, that area all the way down to the end of that paragraph. That's, I think, what the difference is, right?
Correct. The current ordinance allows them to be parked in the front interior yard as long as it's on a parking pad or some sort of pavement behind the front. It cannot be forward of the front plane of the house, and there's no requirement for any type of fencing.
Right.
I know this is gonna be kind of difficult, but in our current ordinance, there is a diagram that shows how they can currently be
Oh, yeah.
parked, and that is on page 52, Marissa.
Yeah, that's missing, yeah.
That to me is really a better, it's so much easier to follow. And, excuse me, with the new ordinance, they cannot park in the front interior yard. They would have to be behind the rear property line, the rear line of the residence. then yet it does say or interior side yard. That's where I'm getting really confused here.
I don't understand the difference between allowing it in the visibility in an interior lot versus a side yard lot. And there are subdivisions and areas that don't allow wooden fencing, so you're not gonna be able to hide, whether it be 6 foot or not, you're not be able to hide a vehicle behind a wrought iron fence. So even though there is a vehicle in question now that's legal right now, because it's parked behind the front plane of the house, but it's clearly visible from the street, and it is behind a 6-foot fence, but it's a wrought iron fence. I mean, that's sort of defeat, in other words, we go back to the intention of the ordinance, the intention of that. And we also discussed at length, there, you know, some of these motorhomes are almost 2 stories high. And do you want to see, you know, a fence, a solid fence to cover that? No. So the decision was made at one point to just maintain it as a 6-foot fence. So it's almost like you're pretending you can't see it. It's kind of like an ostrich with its head in the ground. But a 6-foot or a 20-foot wooden fence in front of it is probably more of an eyesore to those who don't like the looks of a motorhome or a boat or whatever. But I don't understand. I mean, I know I've been involved in this, but I still question whether, why is an interior lot, can you get away with a visibility thing just as readily as, and then also I presented something in the packet about a brand new structure that I have no clue how it was developed or allowed, because it's right up on the rear plane of the house. I mean, there's no setback. It's right up at the rear fence of the yard.
Currently, our current zoning ordinance does not have a rear
That's
yard setback.
That's right, that's
All
right.
you have to do in the current ordinance is have 25 feet of a rear yard.
Right, you're right.
So that's how that,
Right. But, so that is something to be considered as well.
Kelly, talk to me, Goose.
I just have a question for the rest of you. I mean, do you guys hear a lot of complaints about them?
What?
Do you
Sorry?
guys hear a lot of complaints about them?
Yes. But I also hear from homeowners or motorhome owners that moved here because they could park their vehicle at their home
In a non-HOA.
in a
Right.
non-HOA.
Yeah. That's my only comment.
Lisa?
Bryce and Cynthia, is there a norm here? Or is it just,
So maybe I'll offer this piece. To directly answer your question, no, there's not a norm.
okay.
I would say that ultimately this is a big question of what level of regulation is appropriate for the city to your residents, right? So when we think about levels of regulation, they serve different purposes. You know, there's a reason that we don't go in zoning codes into overly specific things to say, I want this specific business at this location. Development is way more organic than that. The city as a whole is more organic than that. So we take broad swipes. You know, there are certain people who like to live in HOAs that are very powerful HOAs because they want to make sure that when they drive down the street, everybody's lawn is cut and everybody's house or property looks the same and is maintained the same way. You know, Christmas lights can't be out past, you know, whatever, January 1, or, you know, whatever that HOA's requirements are. There's other people who don't like that, right? Are any of those things wrong? No. At the end of the day, we kind of have to find out what's right for our residents. Do we have enough flexibility and enough variability throughout our housing stock that we're not solely catering to one single group? And ultimately, that's y'all's decision to make. So.
Can I add one more comment, please?
Please.
So is there, you were talking about grandfathered earlier. So therein lies another question. You say you put this into effect, then are there people that are grandfathered, or then how do you track that?
Okay, so that is an awesome question and something that Nancy and I and Marissa talked about yesterday. And, you know, Bryce, you mentioned an HOA. So the place to do something like this without having to go back in time to say, don't build that concrete pad right there for your RV is an HOA. We'll use Wildwind for example. So you have a gated community and here's what the CC&Rs say, and you can't have an RV. You can own one, you just can't store it in Wildwind, right? And they can always be, an HOA can always be more restrictive than the city. They can't be less restrictive, just as Kay pointed out. But if we do this change, it's not a big change, but it's significant enough that there would be multiple families in the city that suddenly would have to be grandfathered into this because they were in conformance and now they're, using that right, then they're non-conformance. How do we track that? How do we enforce that with code? So are we creating another problem for the city? And we don't have a lot of excess man hours, if you will, to track all this and to enforce it. How do we enforce it? And what I don't like to do, and you all are the same way, we don't like to create, create rules and, solutions in search of a problem that we said earlier. And we also don't want to create laws and an ordinance when this passes becomes the law of the city. We don't want to create laws that are not enforceable. And we just go, yeah, it's part of the ordinance, but we are not staffed or manned to be able to do that. So it's something that we need to think about. How do we enforce it? So keep going. It's a good discussion. 10 more minutes. Jesse.
That was gonna be my question about the, grandfather non-conforming also with the comments we received on that issue. Again, I go back to, all this draft ordinance up to earlier this year didn't have this section in there. So, P&Z added it this last February or March, I guess after a variance request. That's where I came up from. And, personally, I'm not prepared to make that change.
So what I have written down on my sheet of paper here is back in time. And it's something Nancy said yesterday when we were talking about this. How do we go back in time? And we started joking about, obviously, 1.21 gigawatts and an 85 DeLorean hitting 88 miles an hour. And we can go back and tell these homeowners, hey, in 7 years, don't build this concrete pad right here because in 7 years, you're going to be non-conformist. So it was just kind of funny. And it is 1.21 gigawatts, by the way. I looked it up. So, and I agree with Jesse, hey, are we, regardless of whether you own an RV or not, and if you do, you store it here in Garden Ridge because you are allowed to and you're not in an HOA that prohibits it, then are we discriminating against our residents that own an RV legally and store it on their property? We're changing something and all of a sudden they're grandfathered in, but they're non-conformists. And how do we track that? And are we a solution in search of a problem? I've had 3 residents talk to me about what are you going to do about the RVs in town? And I've listened to them. So I've had more residents write to me, actually talk to me and write to me and to all of you about, hey, why? And we have an RV and we store it on our lot and it's tastefully done and it's completely legal, and whether you like RVs in our city or not is irrelevant to the fact that we own one legally and store it correctly. So we gotta consider that. Okay.
Just another aspect of it, there is description in there, or definition, I should say, talks about if you have your motorhome and you're gone for 6 months, there are those who do leave for 6 months. And so when they come back, are they therefore, are they out of compliance, therefore they can no longer park there? I mean, that is something to be considered.
Well, I mean, they'd be grandfathered in, right?
No,
No?
no, no, the question is, if they come back, they're legal now, but and this goes into play before they return, say they're gone now and they return, they come back, they're out of compliance because they've been gone more than 6 months. I mean, in other words, the use of the motorhome has not been in use in Garden Ridge for 6 months plus a day. Then they
That's
come
right,
back,
yeah.
they're therefore
I
out of
remember that,
compliance,
yep.
therefore,
Yep.
so.
No? We all have read that well-written letter, so. Okay. Any other discussion on this for right now? So here's what I would like to do, but it's up to you guys. We talked about it just under an hour ago. I would like to table this and have another work session, just like today, sometime in June. And let's work through this, and remember the Open Meetings Act and everything, but let's work through this with the city staff, and obviously not more than one other council member, and talk about these issues and start solving them now so that when we reconvene at this meeting in June sometime, that we can solve this problem and set a time for a time and date for a public hearing. So either in July or probably August, I'm thinking. So what do you guys think of that? Thumbs up?
Yeah, okay with that. I do have one I want to bring up, though.
Go.
Well, it's not a short one. It's on page 11. Summary of approvals and authorizations. On here, it still has zoning variances, planning and zoning recommendation. I thought we need to take that out, don't we?
Yeah.
That's, yeah, that
To
one.
change to the new setup?
Huh?
Change to the new setup?
Yes. Yeah, we need to take that, we need to,
Yep.
that's a big issue, I thought. We need to
No, we
take care
do.
of.
You're right.
I have a question.
Go.
So if you have an RV, is there a permitting system in place?
I don't think so.
I would assume not, right?
No.
No, just to build the pad, if it's concrete,
Right.
pervious cover.
And you,
Could be an idea for the future. I don't know. Just a thought.
and you have to have adequate electricity. That requires a permit.
For people just to do the parking pad that may be granite outlined with wood or brick, we do not require any kind of permit for that. It is only for the construction of a slab, cover, or the electrical.
Okay, so keep going. Thumbs up? Reconvening? Okay, thumbs up? All right, we
Yes.
have a consensus. And with that, still at the meeting, where's my agenda? Thanks. All right, so that'll conclude item number 4, and we are not going to set or announce a date of public hearing based on what we've talked about. And we'll move on to item number 5, citizen comment period. Anybody want to come up and join the fray? Karen, no? We have a taker. Come on up, sir. As a reminder, we can't comment on what you have to say, and then please state your name and your address, and then write that down for Marissa before you leave. Thank you.
Thank you. I'm Bill Pohl. I live at 21016 Hickory Bend. I had some written comments here. This is regarding short-term rentals. A lot of this has already been covered. There is a pending lawsuit in the city of New Braunfels, Raphael Marfel et al. Versus the city of New Braunfels. This is a gentleman that bought a property across the street from Schlitterbahn, knowing that the short-term rentals weren't allowed, but this lawsuit's now grown to him and 5 other plaintiffs apparently. And that appears to be the pattern where one person starts it. I know in Austin it did that. I think it grew to 5 or 7. My concern here is that the council has a responsibility to make sure that we don't get bogged down in a lawsuit. These things have the potential of growing to multiple people. Plus, there's a lot of big money, Airbnb and so on, that can jump in behind these things. And the more money they spend, the more money the city would defend defending this thing. The more I thought about this, there's a lot of recent really marquee cases where there's shootings, really horrendous things that have happened with these Airbnb rentals. One that happened in Pittsburgh started where the police were called to the property 2 hours beforehand. And I'm sure they were told there's a certain number of people here. It's all prescribed, and the rules that are in the draft are quite clear. You got to list how many people are there, only so many per room. Well, when the shooting took place 2 hours later, there was 200 teenagers there. And my thought is, if the city doesn't feel it can step up and actually prevent a short-term rental in the residential area, it needs to really take a look at what are the issues that are at hand. Thousands of these happen every day. Some of you have stayed at these. But what seems to happen, it goes from okay to totally out of control. And I think, I stayed at a lot of hotels here recently. You mess up at a hotel, the police are called immediately, and you're out in 1 or 2 hours. You need to implement laws, and I'm sorry I'm running over here, just that really get to the root of this, which is the enforcement part, which is look beyond what you're actually requiring in permitting, but when people are actually staying there, do the police are they empowered to go in and really clear it out if it gets out of hand? So if you've got to do this, take a look at the laws that you're actually writing in and give law enforcement the opportunity to do what they would do if this happened in a hotel.
Thank you, sir.
Thank you. Thanks.
Make sure you sign in with Marissa.
Yeah.
Anybody else? Okay. Moving on to item number 6, adjournment. Can I get a motion to adjourn?
Kelly, go ahead.
I'd like to make a motion to adjourn.
We have a motion to adjourn. Do I have a second?
Second the
Motion to adjourn and a second. Any further discussion? Call to a vote. All in favor?
Aye.
Any opposed? All right, we are adjourned at 3:31. Thank you.